Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. I'm Craig Jeffery, your host today. I'm joined with a guest on this episode, Kate Pohl. Kate, welcome to the Treasury Update podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Craig. Glad to be here.
Today's episode is called EBA's Place in the World. What can corporate treasury learn from the EBA? And I think it probably makes most sense to cover what do those words mean. What is the EBA, or how do you say it? What is it?
EBA, we finally refer to it as EBA, but it's the Euro Banking Association. And it's part of actually a larger organization, which also has the EBA clearing, or the Euro Banking Association clearing, which is a huge organization. We can talk about that later. But I'm part of the association, the smaller piece. We're really here to help our members in many ways. Maybe just mention the mission and then, see where we want to go from here. But the point here is to foster dialogue, but also to support and experience and exchange. So in other words, how can we help these members when it comes to really, especially on the payment side, helping payments practitioners really understanding, creating, formulating, debating what is the pan-European vision for payments. And it's done in a variety of ways.
So you said that there's the association, which is educational, and there's the clearing. Maybe we could talk about clearing first, because it sounds like we're not going to talk about that as much. But
right.
That's pretty interesting, to think about the clearing side, right? When you think about central banks, in a sense, there's always a clearing portion. And maybe you could just explain what that is.
But it's really a very vital part of what's going on in Europe today. So it's part of the European payment infrastructure. It's definitely a provider. If you think about it, for clearing and settlement of payments across Europe, both large value payments, but also mass retail transactions, so ACH, I guess in US language. And the whole idea originally when it was founded was to make payments more secure, more efficient, faster, etc. But it's not just one thing. Basically, EBA is divided into three pieces. Maybe just briefly explain that. I think it helps. So first of all, back one step, EBA is owned by a consortium of 50 major European banks. So it's bank owned. And it was established in 1998, and based in Paris. The regulatory format, or the regulation that actually is key for EBA clearing is, of course, the ECB as the European regulator. And the three pieces, the first is called Euro 1. And Euro 1 is a high-value payment system. And it's with net settlement at the end of the day. So it's not Target 2, it's not an RTGS, so it's not a real-time settlement, but it is a net settlement at the end of the day. Chips you have, if I remember correctly, it's net settlement, but many times during the day, and this is at the end of the day. So high-value payment system in euros for commercial banks, financial institutions. Then you have step 2. And by the way, Euro 1 is around, just to give you an idea, 200,000 transactions a day, about 200 billion runs per day in value. With step 2, you have, this is really the low-value mass payment, more ACH piece. So something like 50 million transactions a day, or something like 20 billion transactions per annum. And last but not least, you have, in order to support the whole, what you call real time, but what we refer to as instant payments, is the RT1. So the real-time payment system, which is designed, devised, and supports instant payments in euros 24/7. So the idea is that payments can be completed in under 10 seconds. So that's the mission. And there, of course, the volumes are much less. End of 23, it was about 10 million transactions per month. So small, but growing. And, that's a topic I think we want to talk about another time, but it's very interesting to watch that piece as well. Where are instant payments going, and how is that actually driving everything, including clearing systems, the thinking of the citizens, and of course also corporates. So that in a nutshell is EBA clearing.
I like that. Yeah. Sometimes the use of things like real time, since there are real time payments, it gets messy. Do we call them immediate? Do we call them instant? Do we call them? Yeah. So.
And what is instant? Is instant 2 seconds, 10 seconds? 5 minutes? What is really instant?
I've heard quite a bit. People say under 7 seconds or under 10 seconds. That seems to be instant, as opposed to minutes, as opposed to minutes is not instant. Maybe under 10 seconds. What can we agree on, Kate?
Well, in Europe, it's 10 seconds. So that's absolute, except for the fact, when do those 10 seconds start? And I'm not going to go into it now because then we'd be talking about an hour. But I know we'll talk about it again sometime.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. You mentioned the EBA part, the training, the member information. You said it's owned by, this is a bank consortium owned by 50 banks or so.
The clearing is actually owned by 50 major banks. The association has members, and there's about 160 plus members. Maybe that's a good place to start, if I may, just to tell you a little bit about how the membership looks.
Yeah, go ahead if you explain that.
I'm going to tell you about the membership, and then I'm going to do a discourse and how I got there, because it's sort of, the long and winding road. But yeah, so I looked into it myself just to make sure I had the numbers right. Things change, of course, but it's it's a little over 160 members, almost 170, of which about 100 members are banks. So it's banks, it's not just European banks, as it were, but are banks that are based in Europe. So, of course, you have a JP Morgan that's part of EBA. It's very much their activities within Europe. The members are from 21 countries. And that, since 100, of course, is not 170, who else is there? So there it breaks down, and I also checked this out to be exact. So we have 7 fintech partners. We have 1 academic partner, so university, think tank. We have then what they call premium ecosystem and standard ecosystem partners. And what that really breaks down to is the whole payment provider landscape. So you have clearing and settlement providers, you have system integrators, you have financial service providers, network and messaging operators, IT consultancies, associations. So in other words, going back to my point, the whole mission was, if we're fostering this dialogue and we're supporting members, and we can get into what that really means, to create a pan-European vision of what payments should look like and how they could be regulated and what they should evolve into, then you really need, a universe. It's not just the banks, but it has to be everyone that's part of this payments process.
So there's a huge focus on payments, of course, and education. I know you've told me before, it's not a lobbying organization. They represent the industry, but they're not a lobbying organization. What does that mean practically, that representation?
There's 4 pillars. The first, and the part I belong to, is thought leadership. So if we think about it in terms of pillars, it's really thinking about, if you will, open finance, digital currencies, liquidity management, digitalization. So in other words, forums that people can discuss, papers are produced, discussions are had. The idea is to help the members on topics that they're really interested in. What does this mean? How can we cope with it? What's the best route to take? What do we need to be aware of? Things like that. The second pillar is, and it's a little fluid, but if I would say, so market practices and regulatory guidance. So here you won't be surprised, there's been a lot of work done on KYC, because the members wanted to really say, is there an optimal KYC process, or the fraud taxonomy that's been put together by the EBA, the EBA Association, it's a whole framework that was provided to banks working in a working group, putting it together with members to say, what is the best way to handle and fight fraud? Request to pay, what should it look like? How should it be defined? So there is actually a payment methodology or an actual payment process. Then you have the networking and events, which includes EBA Day, which is a conference once a year. 2,000 folks from all over, Europe and plus come to discuss and debate. Always a very exciting 2 days. Then you have business forums and different roadshows. And then finally, last but not least, there's the whole truly education and training. Up until now, it's been more discussion and working together and trying to create and coming up with ideas and papers and standards. And now it's really a training. So they have literally summer school, winter school, global seminars on different topics so members can learn. These points that I've discussed, they want to know more about it. They're perhaps more junior or coming from a different place in their career, and they want to learn.
Let me make sure I captured them right, because it seemed like there was a lot. There was the thought leadership, the market practices and regulations. Was it networking events was number 3?
Thought leadership and innovation, number 1. Market practices and regulatory guidance, number 2. Networking and events, number 3. And training and education, number 4.
Perfect. I was trying to write everything down, but there was a lot of good stuff there. Maybe this is a good segue for a quick introduction of you and your role. What do you do, and what do you do with regards to EBA?
I have one of these, long and varied backgrounds, but I was a banker for, more than 30 years in commercial banking with strong points in payments, surprisingly or not surprisingly, EBA. We'll get to that. Payments, trade finance, and risk. I went freelance about 5 years ago now, a little bit more. Enjoyed it very much, but I guess you could say I was approached and I decided to work full-time with Projective Group, which is a European consultancy with 5 different practices, including data transformation, risk and compliance, and payments. So I do that by day, and I also continue to, it's been now 5 years, more than 5 years, have been working together with the Euro Banking Association, so with EBA, to provide the open forum on digital transformation. So we, in those pillars, we're part of the thought leadership and innovation piece. And 3 times a year, we do a day's worth of forum with different topics and different speakers. And as you said, you've been part of this. What we're looking to do is really, again, this thought leadership is really important. Discussion, questioning, but also listening. I try to bring in speakers and look at topics that aren't every day or that you don't see everywhere. We're looking at our last forum of the year is on December 4th. And what we're going to do is a topic of looking, obviously, is what is coming next in the whole digitalization space. So going into 25, but a little bit of everything. So a little bit of potpourri, everything, everywhere, all at once, but going into digitalization 25. And we'll be looking at all kinds of different topics that are sort of exciting, thought-provoking, things that our members and our guests really want to hear.
Now, on these events, whether it's training or it's the EBA days or those different events, what's the requirements for corporates? Can they participate? What can they participate in? And when do you recommend that, right?
I wish we had more corporate participation. But, first and foremost, I think what we're trying to do is help the practitioners really put the right products and services out there for their corporate on one side clients. So very, very important. Also their retail clients. So both are considered. As far as corporate goes, I think that corporates that want to influence the banks, corporates that want to hear about what's going on, for example, If I think of North America, but even if I think of Europe, what are the banks thinking? What are their issues? What's coming down the pike? So I think it's interesting for corporate to understand, especially on the, if you will, on the regulatory side, in terms of fraud or new payment ideas that are coming up. Sort of a thought leadership innovation. It's not a matter of showing what products and services that corporates directly will use necessarily, but it is a little bit of a preview of what's going on and the issues that the whole payment sector is coping with. So information, education, networking, learning, these are all possibilities.
Yeah, that's great. I like the description of those that want to influence the banks or learn what's going on. That's particularly useful.
Just maybe one point I try as often as possible, and they love it, is to get corporate speakers, because banks in a vacuum, scary stuff. Creating products based on their ideas without really understanding what their clients are looking for. I mean, I'm not trying to throw stones. I'm not saying the banks are doing it specifically anymore, but the more corporate speakers I can bring on for this very heavily FI audience, they love it. They love to hear the voice.
That makes perfect sense. I guess, Kate, too, we can drop some information in the show notes for whatever link to either one of those day events makes sense, or we just want to make sure that people take the opportunity for that. I found it very interesting to listen through that and participate. So
the forum that I do is open. So very, very much open and appreciated and, welcome. So definitely we should put that in the show notes. Something like an ABA Day as well. Some of the, just to give you an idea, some of the activities are for members only.
Sure. And are there restrictions? Can a corporate join as well, become a member?
Yes, a corporate can join. The question would be whether it makes sense for them to join. I would almost say that if they want to participate in some of these, some of the groups that I mentioned, it might be very interesting. On the other hand, they might benefit even more by going to the functions that are open to them, as I described.
We mentioned low-value payments, high-value payments. We related them to real-time gross settlement systems, like in the U.S., the wire system,
right, FedWire.
Or Target 2 in Europe. What if the corporation is maybe North American, but a multinational organization, North America? That certainly seems to make sense for them to participate. What if they're almost solely North America centric? Is that too much for them to participate in, or at least attend these things?
I guess the question is if they are completely domestic and there's no interest in what's going on in Europe, or, what's coming from Europe or going to Europe, perhaps less so. But I think anyone that has any international business or is trying to understand, for example, what's happening with CBDCs, how is that, we know that almost every central bank in the world is working on central bank currencies, central bank digital currencies. And so is the US. But some of the participants might be very interested to see, how is that going in Europe, and how might that influence, or how might there be a, back and forth, because we're not just talking about one country, we're talking about, the European Union. So that might be interesting for sure. In terms of the business, I think that anyone that has anything to do with Europe would certainly be interested in hearing on what's happening regulatory-wise, fraud-wise, product-wise, all the things that are going on, to understand how they might run their business or run it more efficiently or effectively.
Any final thoughts or any other resources you would point listeners to, whether they're a bank or whether they're a corporate?
I've been looking at, one of the studies that I do scans on a lot of, product, what's coming down on the regulatory side, but I also look at different functions and conferences. And it really depends. The kind of thing that I'm very, very focused on does have more to do with payments or liquidity treasury management within the European space. So again, I think it's very much a question of where whether the company is interested in or has a need to know about what's going on in Europe, then some of this stuff will be very, very applicable. Of course, there are other events as well, but I think that especially the open forum that we put together 3 times a year that I'm moderating, it's also virtual, so that you can join no matter where you are in the globe. You have a time issue. You might have to get up at 3 a.m, but other than that, it's a very effective way and a very efficient way, I think, to really learn what's going on. And you can choose your topics. As I say, this time we're going to focus very heavily on where digitalization is going in different areas. We'll be talking about AI, we'll be talking about fraud, we'll be talking about central bank currency. We'll be talking about, it's a whole potpourri. And indeed, how all of this is affecting, and this might be interesting to audiences in certainly in North America, how this is affecting workers and hiring and talent and the future of work. And what does it mean? Maybe a little bit European-centric, but still, these things have a knock-on effect. So that might be of interest as well.
Kate, thank you so much. So good to talk to you on this topic again. Appreciate you joining the Treasury Update podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Craig.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.